Hello and welcome back to the Open Resorcery. It's Devi, and I have got Twisted, and Light is back with us. And today we are having a discussion over divine masculine and divine feminine. And I know this is a buzzword or buzz term that we hear around all the time, but what the heck does it actually mean? Like, are we talking men and women? What is masculine and feminine in terms of magic, in terms of psychology, in terms of all of that? So, first, I'm going to give the floor to Light, our guest today.
Alrighty. So a good starting point for masculine and feminine is masculine can be uh determined as like a logical type of standpoint psychologically, where it would make oh shit. I'm so fucking tired. All right. So
For context, we're doing this recording at look at that, it's 4:44 in the morning.
yeah,
It's
Perfect.
time. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to go through some notes to keep my mind on track. So but yeah, so masculine energy in a psychological standpoint, it is very logical, and that that goes into being able to be a good problem solver, good problem solvers and leaders. And then for feminine, it would be more of an emotional standpoint, where it makes really great empathetic people and very good great caregivers.
Okay, so that one goes more into the
The
assigned
psychological,
1950s gender roles
yeah,
and some of the
yeah,
Um,
kind of like the
Jungian
standard
concepts. Yeah.
things, but it's definitely grown into a lot more now. It's that's just kind of like a foundational point to like start it all off and then grow from.
Oh, absolutely. So, how about you, Twisted? What is your view on it?
Well, before I get into anything about all right, what is masculine or feminine, I'm just going to go ahead and go into the philosophy and line of thought of Hermeticism and seven principles of Hermeticism, that you can go ahead and find in a book such as the Kabbalion, or just, whatever sort of memes or pictures or any sort of summaries or whatever you happen to come across. Or if you happen to read Corpus Hermeticum and pick it up from any of those texts in there, there's plenty of different things in that philosophy, magical route, school, what have you. But pretty much there are seven principles that are lined within hermetic, sort of idea. And the seven hermetic principles, one of them happens to be the law of gender, the principle of gender. And in this, it is just generally put, gender is in everything. Everything has its masculine and feminine principles. Gender manifests on all planes. So in this sort of sense, right, like, obviously we can think of the physical aspect of like, all right, there's, men, there's women in terms of what you're physically born as and all of that sort of thing. Um, but in terms of like a less tangible standpoint, as Light was going and talking about, there's, the psychological aspect of it. And in you going ahead and talking about the Jungian, Devi, within our subconscious, right? Say we have our conscious mind happening to be, for example, me, I'm a guy, so masculine, right? Within my subconscious, there's going to be a feminine counterpart that is called the anima. And in your case, being that you are, a female, consciously speaking, and born physically as such, within your subconscious, there's going to be the animus, which is that male counterpart in there. One of many different components that within Jungian psychology has been, pretty much like denoted as like, all right, this is one sort of component out of many different components that exist within the psyche, and not just the conscious mind, but within that vastness of the subconscious. And let's not even get into the goddamn super conscious all too much. Yeah, definitely not the particular conversation to be getting in depth with Jungian or any psychology for that matter. But generally speaking, right, if we're going ahead and talking about from a you know uh, metaphysical perspective of the masculine feminine, male, female, what have you, right? There's plenty of different things we can go ahead and expound upon that go ahead and share this, right? And one of them, from a planetary sort of archetype standpoint, is that of, Mars, the planet, and the energy associated with it is male, and Venus is female. And, as I believe it was stated in a more so like just regular mundane sort of framework of, what was it like? Boys are from Mars and girls are from Venus and that sort of thing.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
yes. A
Oh
group of
man.
aliens and all that sort of thing, just kind of converging on the particular planet and all that. But there's a lot more for that I can definitely delve into, and all that. So I guess, you know what? I'll go ahead and say, how about you, Debbie? What are your thoughts on it before going ahead and expounding more so myself or anything?
Okay. So, masculine and feminine, in my view, this is two halves of a whole. Um, One, it is going to be a spectrum in any sense of being. If we're thinking about it, yes, there is going to be a predominant, and there's going to be the one that's behind, but they are both having to exist in a sort of harmony within every being. So while you're not gonna find me sitting here adhering to gender roles or any shit like that, like there is there is something to it. It just really depends on how how the masculine and feminine is appearing in that certain person. What's their balance, if you could say that. Um, but I know you were talking about Mars or Ares as the god of war and whatnot, right? Like we got
Yeah.
Mars up there and we have Venus, that's the feminine. The thing is, there's two gods of war. You got Ares and you got Athena, both masculine and feminine. So it's
Oh well, yes.
just it,
Oh well, yes. If you're
and
talking about in the
yeah.
Greco-Roman sort of thing, like yes, there's Ares and there's Athena. I
Hmm.
was just talking more so from like a
Yes,
planetary
from the
standpoint
planetary
of it.
perspective, which yes, I understand. And Venus, the funny part about Venus is a lot of her iterations also have her as kind of a goddess of war in and of herself, which is very interesting. And I need to study some more on that, but I have read about it previously. So it's different. And this is also where you can go in and bring in the phrase all's fair in love and war. Like you're fucked either way.
Well, yeah, if you want to go ahead and stay within the Greco-Roman spirit of things and talk about different mythos and the legends that are associated with it, Venus or Aphrodite happens to be quite jealous and vengeful, especially in the tales of Eros and Psyche, as well as that of Perseus and Andromeda, to name a few, um, which, I think was briefly covered in the previous conversation we had about love spells and whether they're moral or not, and we kind of like tackled the Venusian archetype, generally speaking,
Hmm.
for the first one of those two. But yes, Aphrodite definitely, if you go ahead and say that you're more beautiful, and all that, they will definitely go ahead and execute the all's fair in love and war sort of mentality. And yes,
A
but
bit. A bit.
yeah. So in that sort of vein, do you have any particular thoughts with that light of like, um, like a planetary archetype standpoint, like, in terms of like, I guess Martian energies and Venusian energies, like,
I'm
tapping
actually
into
not
both of those.
I'm actually
Oh,
not
go
too
ahead.
familiar with astrology actually. That was one category that I kind of skipped over. um
Oh,
I,
okay.
lear- I learned only a little portion of it. Mainly just pretty much just enough to read my own chart, and that's kind of where I ended because I don't know why I just never felt too pulled to actually learn about it. But uh, on the topic of masculine and feminine, like I fully agree with Devi that it's a balance between everybody. Um, oh man.
He's
Oh
so
yes, I
punchy.
got you. Yes, yes. The late night going ahead and having effects on all of us here to various extents, by all means. But yes.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I don't even know what I was thinking about. I just started laughing. But
Oh, okay. I got you, dog.
Makes it
But
even better. 100%.
oh yeah. But yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and I'll take a little more so of the reins to kind of like bring out a little bit more of the metaphysical, spiritual sort of aspects and all that. And
thank
in this
you.
sort of sense, I'm going to go ahead and bring up, this one film that you guys, may have gone ahead and seen before or not, but if you haven't, I definitely recommend it. It's the Da Vinci Code. And in the whole, film and all that, not to go too much into summary or have too many plot spoilers to ruin it, but there's a one particular moment where particular symbolism is gone ahead and broken down. Go ahead and explain a certain plot component, right? And the particular character, which I forget the actor's name who happens to go ahead and play that character, alongside Tom Hanks playing Robert Langdon. It is the actor who went ahead and played Magneto in the X Men series.
Hmm.
um, is Ian something. Ian McKellen, I believe. In any case, they were having a dialogue about, the symbolism of the blade and the chalice, right? So, in that sort of sense, right, the blade, right, the sword, the that in of itself, right, is symbolic of the male, the masculine, the upward triangle. It's a phallic symbol, and to be very crude and upfront, like in terms of phallic symbol, we're talking about dicks here. So in that sort of sense, like that sort of inherent symbolism of something external protruding out, going ahead and imposing its will upon things, right? Whereas, the reverse of that, the cup or the chalice, that is, female, that's feminine in nature. That's the downward triangle and all of that sort of thing. It is able to receive, right? So if you want to think about like, talking about the blade and the sword analogy for the masculine, that is like a sheath for the sword, right? And of course, in that sort of sense, we're thinking about vaginas and all of that, So, in that sort of regard, right, like, that is the completionary aspect of it. Like, every sword needs a sheath, as the saying happens to go. And, like this particular union, the mystical union, because, according to that Hermetic principle stated before, genders and everything, the masculine and the feminine, they go ahead and coexist, right? They have to, like, they're part of the spectrum, right? As you said, Debbie,
Hmm.
they're two expressions of, just base, more so pure energy to an extent that all three of us here are not necessarily able to go ahead and tap into or detect on a humanistic level. But still, like one defines the other, right? Like if it's just like, all right, you got tons of dudes and all sort of thing, right? Like in existence as a whole, then you won't not have anything to compare it to. So it is the female that plays as a reflection of that, so on and so forth. Think of the biblical myth of, Genesis, like Adam was lonely and, he's just there. But guess what? You go ahead and you take a rib from Adam, which is what Yahweh did to create the feminine and create Eve. Now, that is not to say that women by any means are lesser or equal because, hey, look, that's, how it's biblically stated of their origin, but it's just more so of like, hey, look, now you have this counterpart, you have this companion piece that is going ahead and being complementary. And that's the thing, right? Like opposites in of themselves. Just think of a spectrum, or just think of polarities in of themselves. You know, they work in tandem. Same
Hmm.
goes for
Mhm.
order and chaos, and good and evil, so on and so forth, right? Same
Yes.
thing
Of
happens to
course.
apply. What was that like?
I said of course because like everything think like you can always think of everything as like a yin and yang. Like they
Yes, yes.
one can't exist without the other. Like it's not
Oh, yeah.
that anything is above one or below or beneath the other. It they both have to exist in order for the other one to exist in the first place.
Oh, yes. Yes, the yin yang symbols. You go ahead and mention that right there. Yes, very indicative of that sort of dynamic. And the thing about it is, like, within, the yin yang symbol, right, there is the black and the white sort of like swirls, but within that, there is, the center dot, the central dot at its core that is opposite of the
Mhm.
the other. You know what
Mm.
I mean? So going back to the psychology reference, right? Like within ourselves, we have within, say, your and my conscious mind's light, we have the masculine sort of like psyche perspective, conscious approach to things, and for Devi it's the feminine, but in all of us we have that counterpart within our subconscious of the other gender.
Absolutely.
So yeah, in that sort of sense, that's kind of like encapsulated within the yin yang symbol and showcasing that. And I'm trying to think of exactly. Oh yes, so going back to the whole symbolism of the blade and the sword, as well as the cup and the chalice. The male and the female. One particular symbolism that, using triangles in of itself, go ahead and showcase this is the Star of David within, Hebrew iconography, Judaism, all that sort of thing. And, like it's, a six-pointed star. And of course, like, thing about it is like, when you look at it, you may not necessarily like, if you're not acquainted with the symbolism of it, what I just described beforehand, you'll see is like, okay, it's a six-pointed star, it's cool, right? But it is an upward facing triangle, that masculine aspect. Go ahead and interlocking with a downward facing triangle, the female sort of aspect, right? And thus together creating a union, a mystical union, right? That is within,
Mhm.
at least from an esoteric, spiritual, metaphysical, occult, whatever sort of perspective, kind of like what one should strive for, and or what our base mode is already, and just the whole of existence. That's going ahead and finding that proper balance and all of that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And also to go ahead and just use the before passing off to you guys, like chime in a little more because I've been talking for a minute. When you think about that triangle sort of symbolism, what is, some sort of symbols that you see that happen to utilize the triangles quite a bit? It's when we go ahead and we look at the different elements, right? The elemental symbols for those who are into magical sort of stuff. Like there's five elements, in the Western sort of system and school of thought. So I guess from these like the lowest form, quote unquote, to the highest, quote unquote, right? Um, and this is going based off the modern Hermetic Order of Golden Dawn one first, and then there's debate on interchangeability with a couple of these in terms of the order and all the semantics, but just because most people happen to know the Golden Dawn attribution or like the hierarchy, right? So the lowest, feminine, right, in this sort of thing is Earth, right? And then you go up a rung, that is the air component, which is the lower masculine. So then you go up another rung, and then you have the water element, which is the higher, of the two feminine. And then above that, you have fire, which is the higher masculine of the two masculine attribute ones there. And then above the rest of them, at the tippy top, you got yourself aether or spirit, what have you. And that in of itself not have a particular gender noted, um, and all of that sort of thing. And if you were going to go ahead and say it has any sort of triangle-based symbolism, it would probably be more so of the uh, the Star of David and all that sort of thing, combined together and of itself, the base sort of component right there. But in having said quite a bit right there, what are you guys' thoughts on what I've just said, and or anything else that has come to mind?
Mm. Oh man,
Yes, the time of night is kicking your ass. I feel you. I feel you, like.
I'm sorry, man. I'm just feeling like the crash of the day.
Oh
Since
no,
I've been
I
up
got
for
you.
like maybe actually,
24 hours.
yeah. I've been up for a while.
You've been up for a
Well,
while.
you know what? I know where we can go with this. Then I know where we can go with this. So right now it is presently it's like 5 o'clock Eastern, approximately a few minutes past that, right? So
Mhm.
we're in nighttime, right? And all that sort of thing. Like the nighttime, guess what is out? The moon, right?
Dude,
And during the nighttime, what was
how did I not think of that?
that?
Oh man.
I got a little more energy in my system at present, so yeah, a little more energy. It's all good. The gears are not necessarily turning as fast on your end. I understand you're in wind down mode. But yeah. So in the moon, the nighttime, all that sort of thing. This is more so of like a feminine time, right, during the day. The darkness and all that sort of thing, right? And it's more so receptive. You could say it's more so of like the time for like to chill out, calm down, and like open yourself up to different things, whether it be different ideas, so on and so forth. Granted, a lot of people go to sleep at the time, but if you're awake, then this may be if you're a night person, like say myself, and if you guys can go ahead and chime in and say whether you're night people or not, but
Uh, I'm usually a night person and a day person. It's kind of weird. I'm usually up during the afternoon and night. So
oh
I'm
yes,
I'm weird. I don't know how that works, but it does.
Same. Like, night owl completely. I prefer the night, the calm, the non
Man,
chaotic.
this is gonna be a little off topic, but like, have you guys heard that uh in like some research studies that are shown they found out that people who are night owls tend to be of higher intellect, whereas people that are like morning people, right? I don't know how they do it, but the people who can wake up early in the morning every day tend to be happier. I can't remember where my sources were for that, but I saw a few studies on it, and I was very interested in it because it was actually kind of intriguing that was even a study that was done.
Well, in that, I mean, you have people that are following the normal diurnal circadian rhythm, right? They're early riser, they're rising with the sun. They're getting a lot more um, vitamin D, happiness. That
Yeah,
lots of happiness, right?
I should get more vitamin D. I'm not depressed or anything. It's just I should get more. I
Probably.
don't go outside
But
unless
we're
I'm with.
gonna we're gonna turn them back around and we're gonna head back
Yeah.
to topic. That's what we're gonna do. But in that, um, I mean, technically, the moon, nighttime, and everything like that, that is receptive to a lot. I mean, we have the quote witching hour during the night where supposedly the veil is the thinnest, which hilariously, we are literally recording this on the 1st of November, All Saints Day.
which which preceding this was Halloween. Yes,
Yes. Ha 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 ha. But that in and of itself, the moon isn't sitting there and putting off its own energy. It's reflecting the light of the sun. So it is receptive and
yes,
then reflecting back. And that is what the feminine does. It's not necessarily that it is completely incapable. It is that it is going to take in and multiply and use what is given. Hence, do a woman, get a baby kind of thing, right? You're gonna multiply it. Shit's gonna happen, right? But in that, oh, my brain just stopped fucking working. It's
I'm
fantastic. I'm
understandable.
tired.
Trust me, it's understandable. Do you think? Just get the gears turning, all that. It'll
They're
take a
creaky. I
moment.
need the WD-40. Oh, I need the WD-40. God
Nah, I
damn.
got you. I got you. Um, but yeah. So going ahead and talking about like the planetary sort of thing, right? The day and night aspect of it. You know, um, the moon in of itself more so receptive. Like I went ahead and went over like the Golden Dawn sort of hierarchy of the elements, right? And that sort of attribution, and like water is the higher feminine, right? So in that sort of sense, the moon is associated with water quite a bit, and like the whole idea of like the pushing and pulling of the waves, by the moon in of itself, like flowing like water, what I'm saying, being receptive,
Mhm.
like all that sort of general thing, which not to get too much into that, because good old Debbie went ahead and did a video on the moon and its different phases, as well as there was a previous conversation that we've had on the channel about the metaphysics of water. So yes, you can go ahead and check those out for more elaboration on that or any of the elements. Because by the time this will be released, we'll have a video about the metaphysics of the four elements listed, four with their own sorts of different gender, associations,
Mhm.
um, and all that. But yes, so to go ahead and continue on the whole, like sun and moon, day and night dynamic, right? So while the moon is more so feminine, and kind of like it goes ahead and regulates menstrual cycles in women, and all that sort of thing, right? We have the sun, which is more so masculine. The daytime is more so masculine, right? That's more so the conscious mind, to go back to the psychology aspect of it. Whereas the moon is more so the subconscious and all that sort of thing. And as you're saying, like, people tend to be happier during the daytime and all sort of thing. Go ahead and get your vitamin D, get your good little sun rays and all that, right? Like, as opposed to going down to the depths of the subconscious at nighttime where you're thinking, you're contemplating, you're going past the surface level, so on and so forth. So, in terms of like what was being discussed on that little sort of, you could say, detour, which I think actually adds a little more so to this conversation, in particular to the subject, you know, that right there is, indicative of, all right, in nighttime, you're usually contemplating a lot more. You're going ahead and thinking more so deeply about things when everything's slowed down, everything's more so still. It's not necessarily as, we're going to be bouncing off the walls and, like going to do our 9 to 5 or going to do our errands or, oh, yes, we have to go ahead and make sure that the house is clean, or this, that, and the third, right? Everything slows
Mhm.
down appropriately so, and for those who happen to be awake during that time, you take some time to think about things, you contemplate, you reflect, you delve more so into that subconscious, whether you realize it or not, and you're addressing those things and all of that, and um,
Mhm. And of
I'm
course,
trying
it's
to think.
also the
Yes.
energy. It's also the energy of the moon that kind of amplifies it for you. It's because I've had points in time during my day where there's not much going on, but I I for whatever reason I just can't like put that much energy towards just being deep in thought, whereas I can at night. I'm pretty sure it's the energy that is produced as well that kind of helps amplify anything that gets put out.
Well, that and you're a
Oh
very
yeah.
receptive person. Light in particular, you're a very receptive person. So whenever, during the day, there's so many more conscious people. Most people are conscious during the daytime, which kind of
Oh
sends
yeah.
almost like interference, so you can't reach those normal depths that you could when you're either very much solo or during the nighttime.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to think exactly where I was going to go next. Oh, yes, yes. So yes, in talking about the whole planetary aspect of things, sun and moon, and that sort of like reflection, that sort of macrocosm, that macrocosmic sort of thing. Oh yes, no, one thing I should go ahead and say, since I mentioned that moon interrelates with water, and all sort of thing. The sun being a big, great old, at least from mainstream sort of scientific sort of connotations, is a big old neutron bomb going off in the sky and shit like that. Or just a big old ball of fire, as the song goes. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. But yes, the sun up there, that is associated with the elements of fire, which once again, going ahead and doing a little bit of promo, as well as just like interconnecting with previous material, metaphysics of fire video that you can go ahead and watch for more about that. But to go ahead and look at more so parallels and other aspects of how the masculine, the feminine, the male, female, all that go ahead and play out with things. I do want to go ahead and also mention the hands, right? So in that sort of sense, right? Like we have two hands, right? 2 feet and all that sort of thing, two sides to us, all that, just more so the polarized sort of thing. But like, to go ahead and demonstrate like the aspects of male and female, right? So the masculine in of itself is more so the imposing force, right? Once again, the whole phallic symbolism, because we're talking about dicks here, but that sort of thing. Like for most people, our dominant hands are the right hand, right? That's about like 90% of the population or so, and like that is, you know, at least in those cases where it is a right-handed person, and righty tighty, lefty loosey. If you go ahead and have thought about that when it comes to like different valves and going ahead and like say you got the water hose and you try and turn it on or something like that, or when you're learning about okay, this is how I go ahead and turn on the faucet to run some water while I'm cleaning some dishes or after I go to the bathroom, whatever. But you know um yeah, so in terms of for most people, the dominant hand is the right hand, and that is going to be utilized for the projection, the pushing, the sending out, energy, right? If you're going ahead and doing energy work or something like that, or what have you, you're going to go ahead and utilize it for more tasks of that manner. Whereas, the non dominant hand, which for most people happens to be the left hand, that is more so for receiving, that's more so for absorbing, taking, as opposed to dominant hand giving. So, in that sort of sense, like that is another way that this particular duality plays out, and all of that sort of thing. And like in that sort of sense, um, not only is it just like with our hands, right? Um, but once again, like with any aspect of ourselves, but our hands, what are they governed by? They're governed by the two sides of the brain, right? And even those in themselves have their own, you know, dualistic sort of aspect that is inclined and related to the masculine and the feminine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, Debbie, I think you could probably go ahead and speak to that a bit, in terms of the two halves of the brain and what they happen to, be in relation to the masculine and the feminine.
Well, I mean, the two halves of the brain, the funny part is it literally switches down the neck. So the left side is controlling the right side, and the right side is controlling the left side. So, I mean, even in our bodies, everything's kind of fucked, right? Um, but in terms of that, believe it is the left side of the brain that's more creative and the right side that is supposedly more structured. I believe. I don't necessarily
Uh,
remember 100%.
Left hand side is more so of the logical, whereas the
Left is
right
logical.
hand
Ah,
side, yeah, left is logical, the right is more so creative, more so abstract, and all that sort of thing.
which makes sense because the twisty turny thing that happens at the neck. Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, they do. Um, but in the brain, the funny part about it is, um, and I'm gonna go back to like basic biology kind of stuff now in terms of like actual gender of male and female. Um, in the womb, once some of the male hormones actually start to activate in the fetus, there is a hormone that is secreted that actually severs a lot of the ties between both hemispheres of the brain for the male brain, which I find incredibly fascinating, but also kind of makes sense in why men can have such a singular drive, whereas a woman is kind of taking more of a whole picture kind of thing. Horse blinders, as I like to call it. It's almost like they're
Yeah.
sitting there just complete tunnel vision and not seeing the surroundings. But women, of course, we maintain that connection. And so this is where you and I have had conversations about compartmentalization. And
Yes.
men are able to compartmentalize a whole lot better than a woman is because we are completely interconnected in everything. Not everything has to have a box. It can be just a giant tangle of yarn and we can understand it. But you guys, y'all are just like all in your little boxes, sealed up little boxes. None of the boxes touch. Like just keep them separate.
Oh yeah.
I like
And
my
And
boxes; they feel safe.
and and you going ahead and taking it to that sort of avenue, right? Like I think that it's definitely a good time to go ahead and mention, right? The aspects of like order and chaos, right?
mm-hmm,
So in terms of order, that's more so of the masculine. That's more so of like the all right. We're going to go ahead and differentiate. We're going to compartmentalize. We're going to go ahead and label. We're going to go ahead and sector all these different things off, right? Give it meaning. Give it purpose, right? As was supposed to say the feminine, it's more so of the chaotic, right? It's everything going ahead and coalescing all at once. That's all the potential, all that sort of thing. And it's just like, as vast as the sea and the ocean, to go back to
mm-hmm.
the water analogy. And and uh being that I've gone ahead and referenced this individual and or the book that I'm about to mention, there is a very good book, at least from my own interpretation, called the the Language of Creation by Mathieu Peugeot, the brother of Jonathan Peugeot, who happens to be a YouTuber. For those who are not aware and have not heard me mention him, like I don't know however many times
Like every other
so far.
video, I think. Every other video. Like fanboy, huge fanboy over there.
Well, yeah, I'm by no means, and that's actually something I want to touch upon in a bit. I'm by no means like a Eastern Orthodox Christian. That was not my background, and anything like that. But I do definitely appreciate that perspective and having gone ahead and seen Jonathan Peugeot videos. Um, but in terms of like say the order and the chaos, right? In the language creation, his brother Mathieu Peugeot goes ahead and happens to talk about these different aspects of existence, within the Bible and break it down, and talks about like the heaven and the earth, right? So in that sort of sense, like it relates to the masculine and feminine and the whole order and chaos dynamic of like the heaven, that is more so masculine sort of thing, right? The whole notion of a sky daddy for those who go ahead and
Oh,
happen to
jeez.
believe in different Abrahamic religions or monotheistic religions, or even in the case of say more so pagan sort of religions as it's considered, the Greco-Roman pantheon as we mentioned before, or anything like that, there's that sky daddy, there's that authoritative principle in the sky and the heavens, right? That above, the sort of heavenly principle goes ahead and informs and gives meaning to what is below, all that sort of thing, and which is the earth, right? And that's kind of like the dynamic in relationship between that. So once again, the masculine and the feminine going ahead and working in tandem, right? And all of that sort of thing. Um, and okay, granted, now I'm the one going having a little bit of a brain fart and all that
All
sort
good.
of thing.
Structure and flow, chaos and order.
Oh yes, there you go. But yes, so in that sort of sense, that's how usually goes ahead and plays out. And I will go ahead and say this, right? Even though that sort of attribution is given, it's not as if it's just like completely static, like oh it's a one-off thing. Like it's more so like a sort of like all right, the in how we see it, the heaven is the masculine and the earth is the feminine and all that sort of thing, right? But from that particular heaven, at least from I see it, how I see it, right? Like that particular orderly sort of aspect principle, it came from quote unquote nothingness, which you could say in of itself is like feminine, right? Or you could say is gender neutral, or what have you, to whatever extent that you have esoteric understanding. You know what I mean? But like I'm kind of thinking like in the model of say kabbalistically, or from gnostically speaking, right? Of the nothingness, in the Gnostic model it's Ein Sof or, that's just being like nothingness devoid of like anything, in terms of existence, the complete opposite of that. That in of itself, if we're gonna attribute a gender to it more so, that would probably be more so of the feminine, because it's more so open. It's more so like open concept, the void, all that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But in that sort of sense, like it does that mean everything just stops there because there's nothing? No, that's relative to us and our comprehension of things. So as above, so below. And above that, there's probably another higher quote unquote masculine sort of principle, right?
Well, they
At
just
least from
fold
my
into each
understanding.
other, probably
Oh,
from eternity. Like, it's just the way that
yes,
it is.
yes, and different macrocosmic and even microcosmic sort of things relative unto us. And to take it to the microcosmic sort of thing, like even when it comes to like the little atoms, little foundational elements, granted not the smallest necessary measurement, I don't think, because it's just an ever continuing thing, at least from my own perspective, and I think you guys would agree with me on that. But atoms, right? Like there's the positive and the electric charges of protons and electrons, right? So once again, masculine and feminine playing its part in all that sort of thing. And just because I say negative, right, does not necessarily mean that it's an inherently bad thing, even though good and bad happens to be attributed to masculine and feminine and have their own sorts of polarizations in of themselves. But everything is relative, and everything happens to go ahead and work uh, together, right? It happens to reflect. It happens to work in tandem. They're both along a spectrum. They're both giving definition to the other.
Well,
So
yes.
at the end of the
And
day, is something truly that bad? But please go ahead.
as you were saying with the good and bad, yes, each polarity is going to have a negative aspect of it because too much of anything is a bad thing. Like, that's just how existence is, really. So, yes, there
Oh
is going to
yes, yes,
be a negative aspect to the masculine. There is going to be a negative aspect to the feminine. In the feminine, you're going to see more smothering, kind of, I don't know, how would I describe? negative aspects of the feminine.
Well,
Destructive.
yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Okay, so you know what? I'll go ahead and ask you. I think you've gone ahead and mentioned this once before on channel thus far,
Mm.
but your whole sort of spiel on narcissists and all that sort of thing, and like
Ah.
the whole like psychology of like parents, and like saying having a golden child or black sheep and all that sort of thing,
Yes.
like it playing out in like a motherly sense.
Well, in a motherly sense, like just like I said, smothering or neglectful. It you because it's even a spectrum on how it manifests in itself, right? You're not going to find the same markers on every time that you see a negative aspect of the feminine.
Oh yeah.
Um, it's just the way that I see the feminine, and I know this is kind of sidetracking, but I think it gives more perspective into how I view it. But I see the feminine as more collective focus. This is more community. This is, yes, it is caregiving and making sure everything's good. Um, just more of a wider perspective, whereas the masculine's more like individual focus, kind of zoomed in. But in terms of that, like if we're just going through parenting or whatnot, the bastardization of the feminine is going to be, it almost like makes a full circle into masculine, so individual focus. The collective serves me versus me serving the collective, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Oh well, yes, yes, and you know what? This is something that I know Light was particularly going ahead and rather excited to go ahead and speak on. But yes, I will go ahead and agree with you there. And before passing the baton over to Light here, I will say that when it comes to this is a video title of by a the Clips channel of Jonathan Pajot, that I was kind of looking at before I went ahead and we were discussing the subject. I had seen it before amongst many other videos and content of his, but one of them happens to be that feminism, or at least fourth wave feminism, the current modern iteration of it, and you could say an extreme sort of expression of it, is a fetishization of masculinity in terms of like kind of like what they're trying to become and all of that sort of thing. And you know, at least from my understanding of it, just to generally put it right, it's like saying, "Oh, well, patriarchy is like a very bad thing in terms of like what has been like a precedent or like just like the overtness of the masculine aspect in of itself, and then like it's like, hey, look, femininity in of itself, it shouldn't be feminine, it should be masculine, and trying to go ahead and change that and like flip everything on its head and like throw us into a state of disarray and chaos, and all that sort of thing. And that's not to say that there is not necessarily a negative or toxic aspect to masculinity. Like there definitely is. Both aspects, can be expressed poorly. Even though we've
Mm.
just been touching upon more so the feminine aspect. But this is where I'm going to go ahead and pass it light, and him go ahead and give his 2 cents in regards to his thoughts on that. Because, like I said, I know this is in particular something you were wanting to discuss in this conversation.
Dang, dude, you're making it sound like I've been waiting for this. Look, I'm glad that somebody's brain is working like properly because I couldn't have said it better about the feminine side of things. Yes, there have been some toxic things that have been going on with what is considered fourth wave feminism uh in comparison to like things like first wave feminism where it was very orderly and it was very proper and actually pushing a very good motive. But I mean,
we've, we've
I
come a
can
long
put
way from the suffragettes.
yes, 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 very much so, and I'm happy about that. Like Uh, but one thing that I would say is the reason why I even bring it up or have brought it up is just because it no longer is about it. It seems that it's no longer about equal rights. It's about oppressing the opposite. The uh, and it that's where it kind of makes that full loop into where it kind of turns everything into chaos. Oh man.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, like I'm not gonna just sit here and say that that's the only group that's in the wrong or whatever. But I mean, there are some things that I'm sure is behind that movement that is still good for the world. But there's a lot of things that are more in the public eye that are not so good. And on top of that, there are things on the masculine side that are taking place right now that are also good, but at the same time also bad.
Oh
For
yes.
example, uh, just to throw it out there, the Andrew Tate situation.
Oof.
I believe that he does say a lot of things that some young men or older men or guys in general do need to hear, but it's that like how do I put it? Uh like it's kind of suffocating on how they're pushing the envelope too far in like different directions to the point where it's kind of making it full circle and making it uh and it's not necessarily a healthy circle. It's just you're pushing the envelope too far one direction and you're not taking into account the other side because the other side is also needed in order to make a proper movement.
Oh
So
yes.
Absolutely.
whenever these type of things take place, it will cause chaos no matter whether it's masculine or feminine. It's just you need to take into account masculine and feminine with these movements. That's all I really
Oh
need to
yes.
Absolutely.
say.
And I mean, with the Andrew Tate stuff, right? That
Oh yeah.
is masculine is all about imposition of will, but there is a certain respect that is taken with that imposition of will. Yes.
Yes, there have been I've done a little bit of research on these two different areas, and I will say that the Andrew Tate, he has some really good talks with some females that are what I would consider or what I perceive as like a fourth wave feminist kind of deal, and it kind of shows where the boundaries are and everything. And but there are points in time where like things do get taken way too far than it even needs to. Uh, so I do believe that there is a good thing that can come out of it, but it's still pretty bad. Like
Well, yeah.
there's a lot of bad that's coming along with it, and it's not okay. So I'm not sitting here saying that I'm an advocate for him or anything. I'm just saying that I kind of see it as I kind of see Andrew Tate kind of like first wave feminism, not like in a literal sense, but like how do I describe like a similar type of sense, like uh because with first wave feminism, uh I've done my digging on this. They tended to actually exclude black women from that in order to bring more white women into the movement
Mm-hmm.
itself. So like there's some bad sides to it, but it's pushing a good type of message. So I would say that's kind of where that whole situation lies, but there's still a lot of bad that's really going along with it that should not be acceptable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I
But I
mean,
mean
with
it's
those
a person.
conversations in and of themselves, you've literally got two extremes talking to each other, and they're just going to highlight, and it's almost
Mm-hmm.
like the worst kind of clash that you could have because it's going to
Yes.
show you the extreme differences, and
Mm.
you may agree with one side over the other because I mean, let's be honest, not everyone stands exactly in the middle and can see both sides of the coin, right?
Of course, yes. I will even admit that I'm more towards the men's side because I've lived my whole life having to deal with, um, for the lack of better words for it, those type of women that
Mm-hmm.
were like on those podcasts that him and his group of buddy, I don't know what they are, but like him and his like group of buddies or whatever talking to this group of girls or whatever, and I've had to deal with those same type of people, and it's really not fun.
No, it's not.
um, so yes, I would say that I definitely side more on Andrew Tate's side, but not Andrew Tate. Does it, if that makes any sense? I side with that pushing of the envelope, but not that, because that is an extreme version of it, of like trying to point out each other's flaws and everything, and it's like it's just a mess. Like, just bring everything up to the same level and then talk about it in like a diplomatic type of way where we can actually try to find a middle ground on every situation that everybody finds somehow. I know that's probably asking for a little too much from a society,
Well,
but
probably.
that's kind of the type of world that's the type of world that I wish to live in, where people can actually sit down and um, excuse their differences for a little while and put their egos away and sit down and try to come to a solution of each of their problems. I understand that will take a very long time. It's going to be a very hard route to take, but it would be worth it in the end, because if you have a dispute with somebody, you can either sit down or you guys can agree to go somewhere, brawl it out for a second, come back, and you're best buddies again.
I
Simple as that.
mean that I'm gonna say that does not work with the feminine at all. We don't do that. You guys, I respect the shit out of being able to just like fight it out and then go have a beer, cause cat fights
It's a
don't work
respect
that way.
it's a respect thing, man. That's that. I guess guys kind of learned that, like, it if you are willing to stand up for your own views and you fight it out, um, you kind of grow this like weird type of respect for each other, that like, okay, I see that you're willing to stand up for your views. I'm willing to stand up for my views, and it's weird because you kind of learn something about each other in the process of it. It's not just like a, oh, I'm gonna fight you because I don't like you. It's kind of like a settling of a dispute. So,
Yeah,
but
no.
that's why I said like we could talk about it diplomatically, or if you want the other option, then it's there. But the primary goal is to get everybody to be able to try to come to the same uh to the to the same agreement of a diplomacy, a
Diplomacy. Yes.
diplomacy. Yes. So yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say to that. Is uh, we got two movements going on in the world right now. They both have they're both extremists. Um, some of which both of them say is true, and then a lot of it is false. A lot of it is just toxic as
It's almost
people.
political. It's almost political in
Yes.
a state.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's like the way that I look at it is just like political ads, because you see them especially around voting time, which ta-da, we're around voting time. Yay, midterms. But
dude. I've seen those all week,
oh
and
yeah.
it's
And
so
they're
tired.
ugly. And the thing is they're not sitting there and promoting what they're doing good or anything like that. They're attacking the other person, the other side. And honestly, that's what most of it has devolved into. Whenever you
Yeah.
have a movement going forward, it's no longer this, okay, this is what I have to bring to the table. It is, let me attack the other side and tell you how bad they are, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't help anybody. Especially, if we're talking about like our modes of being, which our modes of being is within masculine and feminine framework. That's how the world operates and is necessitated.
Yeah. and I could just give a reference real quick, and then we can get like more back on topic. Uh, and the reference is like if we look at history and look at how the Black Lives Matters movement was there, and then All Lives Matters came, and how that started a whole dispute. Like it's gonna turn into the same thing if we don't try to like figure out a way on how to shift our focus and try to come to like a mutual ground of some sort.
I would
It'll
agree.
just cause conflict and yeah.
Meaningless
Or with the
conflict.
recent,
Yes,
or with
meaning
the recent, not
it's
just the
pointless because
All Lives Matter
it can be
sort of
avoided
thing, but
so easy.
oh, bad.
What were you saying,
Oh
Twisted?
yeah, oh yeah. Not just with the whole Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter sort of thing, which I don't even see necessarily as a polarity or anything like that, but with the recent at the time of this recording, recent instance of Kanye West and you know, going ahead and like having the White Lives Matter shirts, and him getting a bunch of flack for that as well as other things, right? And all of that, like, you could say the whole black and white sort of thing is being portrayed and broadcast as like, that sort of polarity in of itself, right? And once again, like I just to mention that in terms of you having mentioned the whole BLM all lives matter sort of thing is like all lives matter. That is where we should be at. That's more so a
Mhm.
neutral standpoint, at least where I'm coming from, and just the general spirit of, at least in regards to, if you're gonna go ahead and like, put a label on like the whole Andrew Tate stuff, which I'm not familiar with him and his videos and content. I get the general gist, but I haven't really delved into it, right? But he's kind of
Yeah.
more so within the MGTOW sphere of things, right?
Hmm.
The hyper masculine and all that sort of thing. Which, for those who don't understand, MGTOW, that is men going their own way, and all that sort of thing. That's like a sector of YouTube I've gone ahead and delved into quite a bit. And me thinking that in of itself, a lot of it is cope. At least in regards to the audience, maybe not necessarily people who are making the content, and say the Andrew Tates or the Kevin Samuels or anybody like that, but at least for the audience of it, right? And like the sense of, oh, hey, look, you're going ahead and you don't know how to engage with women, romantically speaking, or sexually, or just socially. And, because they feel out of sorts, because you can say in a modern day and age of less personal interaction, or like the fact of like, oh yes, like how things are inherently within our, biological drives and social mechanisms, right? Like, you know, when it comes to like say women, they have more so the ability to go ahead and choose their partners because they're gonna have a lot more pursuers, right? And if we're gonna go ahead back to our ancestry, and our more so like our roots of where we come from, right? Like, and as we've already discussed in other words with the aspects of the masculine and the feminine, right? Like, men used to be the hunters, women are the gatherers, and
Hmm.
that sort of thing. So the men are going to go ahead and they're going to go ahead and they're going to fight for that damn food. They're going to go search out there. They're going to go find that big old buffalo to kill, or say that lion or whatever the hell it is. They're going to bring it back to the village. And what are the women doing? They're gathering the nuts. They're gathering the berries. They're gathering the plants, all different herbs, so on and so forth. Right? They're holding down the homestead, right, and all of that sort of thing. And within that, right, like whoever happens to go ahead and bring home the big old buffalo or the big old lion or whatever food is going to be available as the meat, like, and within those sorts of tribal, communal sorts of like things, like there's going to be an established hierarchy of like who is the quote unquote alpha male, which is something that, within the big Tao spirit things, is utilized inside quite a bit, right? So, in that sort of sense, like whoever the top male is in that sort of regard, like, oh, hey, look, the women of the village are going to want to go ahead and be with that guy because he's showing that he's capable of providing and protecting not only her, but who else? The village as a whole, but their children, creating children, procreating, and being able to provide for the next generation, and so on
Hmm.
and so forth. So, in that sort of sense, right? Like, this is like, you know, generally speaking, like, because in the modern day and age, we don't go ahead and at least like we as men a lot of times because of the whole like, less personal aspect, the less sort of like going ahead and like interacting face to face with women or what have you, like there is a frustration and that, oh yeah, you know what, I don't know how to socialize with women, I feel awkward and all that sort of thing, so I'm looking for something to guide me in that way. And that is where you could say in terms of the hyper masculinity and to use the term extremism, as you put it, like of like say the alpha male like MGTOW sphere things when it comes to YouTube and other sectors of the internet, right? Like it's pretty much a lot of dudes who are lost and don't necessarily have a particular father figure
Hmm.
or role model that's stable to go ahead and show them the way and be like, hey, look, son, or say even if it's an older brother, like older cousin or something like that, like, hey, look, this is how you go ahead and interact with women, and you can go ahead and be successful in your romantic and sexual pursuits or your social pursuits and all that sort of thing. So it comes from a place of feeling lost and not knowing thyself, which that's
I
kind of
actually
like
have a
where the
Jungian
Torah.
quote for that one. I'm not even going to
Oh,
lie.
go ahead.
So, humankind is masculine and feminine, not just man or woman. You can hardly say of your soul what sex it is. But if you pay close attention, you will see that the most masculine man has a feminine soul, and the most feminine woman has a masculine soul. The most manly you are, the more remote from you is what woman really is, since the feminine in yourself is alien and contemptuous.
Oh yes, yes. So once
From the
again,
Red Book.
animus and anima. Oh yes, yes. The good old infamous Red Book. But yes, in terms of the Jungian psychology and subconscious aspect, aside from the soul spirit, which you mentioned in that quote, there's the anima in men, that's feminine within your subconscious, and the animus in females, that is the male counterpart inside conscious, and all of that. But well, yeah, and I guess one other thing that I'm gonna mention in terms of this before we kind of like get it back more so to like the spiritual, metaphysical sort of aspects of things, and use it as a segue, is like when it comes to say fourth wave feminism or any sort of like, oh yes, like what to subvert the current established things because there's a patriarchy going on. I know that prior to having this conversation, Devi, you went ahead and expressed that sometimes you get a bit frustrated when I go ahead and meme about that for shits and giggles when you have conversations and stuff. Um, but like I'm gonna go ahead and say that like at least in regards to like going ahead and trying to like have the hyper feminine sort of thing, like in what I mentioned as like the like the fetishization of the masculine, trying to take that sort of realm of things, like um they're trying to establish a matriarchy instead. You know what I'm saying? And kind of like have that sort of like have one domineering over the other and all that sort of thing. Where truth be told, even though like the overt sort of like power is like within like oh yes, the front facing sort of like royalty. If you want to think about like kings and queens used to be like the king, right? But guess what? Behind every great man is a great woman, and the more so subversive, the more so like excuse me, as opposed to over, there's the queen right there going ahead and supporting the king, and like pretty much like they work in tandem. They have their strengths, their weaknesses. If we're going by basic sort of masculine, feminine like roles and all that, which does not apply in every single case. So Debbie, you said earlier that you don't necessarily believe you ascribe by traditional roles of like the feminine in its totality, right, and
Mm-hmm.
all that sort of thing. But like usually on average, that tends to be the case. But in that sort of sense, like there's power within femininity. You know what I mean? And it's a balance. They balance each other out.
Well, of course.
But yes, in terms of that, like, I the whole idea of patriarchy and all that, I personally don't agree because I recognize and respect that there is power within both of those. But in going ahead and like saying if there is a sort of at least like from the outside looking in and not being as well read or as experienced with it, that we can kind of go ahead and detect from like a religious sort of sense, and this is why I'm going ahead and using it as a segue to get more so in line with like the metaphysical and the spiritual aspect of things. That Islam in of itself and the whole idea of Sharia law that may be seen as a bit of patriarchy, and all that sort of thing. Um, the outside looking in. Now, granted, I'm not Muslim, and definitely putting that caveat out there. Granted, I will say that when it comes to my interest of it, it may be a little more so further along than the other two of you here, just because of conversations we've had. Um, but generally speaking, that is more so of like an example of patriarchy and all that sort of thing because of suppression of women, socially speaking,
But I will
and many
say,
other
as
regards.
an addendum, so you are stationed in an area that is more open, more free, right?
Yeah,
I'm in Texas.
yeah.
What just happened in Texas?
Well, go ahead and say it
Okay,
with your chest.
yes, say it with my chest. We have the abortion rights going on, right? Which does, in fact, take rights away from women. Where you
Well,
live,
yeah.
those rights are intact. Where I live, they are not. And so, really, it's speaking from two different experiences here.
I have two different viewpoints on that whole situation. If you want me to elaborate,
Elaborate.
so for one, I don't think it's okay to take away rights from people at all by any means. However, um, with the rate that the birth rate that is happening right now is very slow, so we could actually uh once older generations start passing, uh we could be facing a really serious situation on population.
Not
So
necessarily. Not necessarily.
I mean, within like a few generations is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It could be serious. We need to think multiple generations ahead. We can't just keep thinking about one generation anymore. Like, we've seen where that has gotten us, and it's gotten us this far. It's not going to get us much farther if we continue it. So at this point, I think we need to start thinking a few generations ahead. So I understand where they're coming from, but it's not okay to take away rights from people.
Oh yes.
Well, it's
Now I
not
will
just
I
say
that.
feel
that.
like
It's not just that.
I
Because they took the rights, right? Who is actually
mhm,
going to be affected by that? Like if we're looking at this as a whole, right? Who is actually going to be affected? It's those of a lower income, correct?
mhm,
Kids are fucking expensive. I will say this as a mom of 3.
mhm.
The
I
moment
was
that
actually
you put an extra mouth to feed in the mix, it gets harder and harder.
mhm,
So it is harder to even achieve middle class, right?
mhm.
Yes.
And on top
Uh,
of that, the middle class and middle class is actually getting pretty much lowered towards uh
Exactly.
low class just because of the inflation rates, and uh it's becoming a larger and larger gap between middle class and uh top, like top,
Yes.
I don't know what to call it. I'm too tired for
Upper
that.
class.
Thinking
Yes.
yeah. Yeah.
upper class, yes. So the gap is getting way larger and everything. But what I was going to add on to that was if we could have funding for people who do have kids that would like to actually help the population grow to like at least to like safe limits for like multiple generations down. If we could provide funding for that, so we could actually get that ball rolling, I feel like that would be a better option than to strip people's rights away. Like that's not okay
Absolutely.
to do that,
Because I'll tell
especially
you, if
because
anything,
people.
like the finance issue is the reason why people don't want to have kids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why I proposed that. So it's really not okay because there, if I'm not mistaken, there have been some. This is going to be a sensitive subject, but there have been some people who have taken advantage of other people, and um, in some areas they are not actually able to have an abortion,
That
and
is correct.
it's a horrible situation to be in, and I feel very bad and deeply for them. Uh, and I don't believe it's okay for this situation to continue at all by any means. And that is where I was stating that some of the things that fourth wave feminism that
You
fourth
cut
wave
out there
feminism.
for a second, honey.
Oh, all right.
Go ahead.
Um, so that is one of the subjects that I believe fourth wave feminism is really good on, is that they're pushing that this should not be okay because it's not. But if we could somehow find a way to get funding for people who are willing to put in the effort and everything to help with this possible situation down the line, then we should do it that way because it's not okay for people to be put in this situation and have to live their lives like that because it's going to do a lot more worse than good. You'll have people rebelling at some point, and you can't tear down a system without another system in place. It's just like
Exactly.
trying to tear away it's like trying to just like kill the ego, but all you're really doing is just replacing it with another ego. It doesn't work like that. We can't like I don't want to see a situation where that ends up being like the only destination that we have.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And let me just go ahead and while all that is like good conversation now, let's just try to realign it back on
Yeah,
track.
I'm sorry about that.
No,
No, I
no,
I
mean,
no,
was
no,
that's
because
it
I was
was
don't
like
more
apologize.
so
I was serious
highlighting
about that.
the different perspectives that was going on. And,
Yeah,
you're sitting over there saying my patriarchy, and it's like, okay, but let's actually see where we're coming from.
yeah. But in any case, so I want to go ahead and actually like, use this as a segue, right? Of like, so for example, right? You're talking about your experience of like, all right, you know what? You're from Texas, right? And the whole abortion sort of thing going on, and like your experience, go ahead and like, uh, you know, go ahead and proceeding that, like, and raising, like, being raised in that environment, what have you. And the one thing I wanted to go ahead and like something we actually discussed before this recording earlier on, was like that. So give a little bit of context as like your background, like your particular Christian background, and all that sort of thing,
Ah,
right? And how it plays into the masculine and the feminine, from
okay.
your understanding, like elaborating more so on your worldview, and then like I kind of want to do like a little bit of comparative thing with like other denominations and such.
Okay. So I was raised Southern Baptist by my mother, but of course, my father does play a role here because my grandfather was a pastor for Church of Christ. And I will say that inside of Baptist and Church of Christ faith, women don't really have a place. From my own experience, it is women can be seen but not heard. Children can be seen but not heard. You don't have a voice. You don't have uh, a manner of existence that is not subservient to a masculine man. I'll put it this way. One of the things that I actually heard from my mother, and this is going to actually sound fucked up because I haven't told you this yet. She would always have me be the one that was assisting her with chores, dinner, like cleaning up, everything like that. And I actually called her on it once because she wasn't having my little brother do so. And my little brother is literally only like a year younger than me. So anything that I could do, he should be able to do as well. Um, and she turned to me and said, "Well, you're going to be the one that has to do everything anyway. So you get in the training now." And it's just like, "Oh, okay. That's where we're going with this." Excellent. So it's reinforcement, unfortunately, from the feminine in my life that this is what the role is, and that is really all you're ever going to amount to.
Oh yes. And like that sort of thing. So you can say like, from your particular Baptist upbringing, from what you understand, right, and all of that, forming your perspective. Like you could say that expression of like say Christianity, right? Every religion has its various sects and denominations and all that sort of thing, right? So, and when I mentioned Islam before, that in of itself, like, as like general basic bitch sort of view from the outside looking in, one can go ahead and say it's quite patriarchal, in terms of like, say, Saudi Arabia as a nation imposing that, right? But in terms of like Christianity, right? Just do a comparison, right, of like how masculine and feminine kind of like play within those, right? Um, so the Baptist, you could say that it's more so of a subservience for the feminine, right, to the masculine, right? More so
Yes.
subservience is not necessarily as like a equal sort of like perspective. Whereas like for me in and of itself, like my background in particular when it comes to Christianity and all of that, like on one side of the family, like my mother's side, it was more so like the family was Catholic in particular, and when it comes to like my dad's side of the family, he was more so like born again, all that sort of thing. Which I can see like the differences, like if it's like the born again Christian sort of thing, there's not as much of a like there is that more so of the the separation or the fragmentation that's like akin to like the Baptist sort of things, like more so that Protestant and or evangelical sort of lens. But at least on the Catholicism side, right? Um, in that sort of sense, like I see that there's more so of a balance between the two, right? Like, I will say that when it comes to the Trinity, right? Of like, God the Father, God the Son, God the like, God is the Holy Spirit, right? Like it's not overtly stated that like, the Holy Spirit is feminine, but when we go ahead and look at it from an esoteric lens, it happens to be more so, right? Even though it's not necessarily what's proclaimed within Catholic churches overtly, what have you. But the one thing that I will say, it goes ahead and it makes up for it, and kind of like shows more so of like a balanced scale, is like the veneration of the Mother Mary, right? And the Mother Mary being the vessel, being the means which Christ went ahead and was able to go ahead and be brought into the physical realm, so on and so forth. So once again, the heaven going ahead and meeting with the earth and all that sort of thing, right? And pretty much like that sort of sense of things, like that is kind of like the deification of Mother Mary, even though they say, hey, look, well, Mary's not God or not necessarily a God or anything like that. But truth be told, it's putting Mary up on a pedestal and all that sort of thing, like a redemption for the actions of Eve, right, in the garden, right, a redemptive act. Um, but yes, I see more so of like a actual, balance and that sort of thing in that regard. And of course, within Catholicism in itself, like there's different other feminine figures who are like given their just dues, and like, hey, look, with the showing mercy and all these different sorts of things. Mother Teresa, Joan of Arc, so on and so forth, right? Um, but yes, I see more of a balance in that regard. And like as well as like say Eastern Orthodox. Once again, I was, this isn't necessarily something I was raised with, as I mentioned before, in talking about the Peugeot brothers. But like in watching a lot of his content and kind of like understanding that viewpoint, it has a lot more of esoteric, a metaphysical, a spiritual sort of lens, a mystical lens to like how like Christianity and that brand of it interrelates with the world, and like it goes ahead and definitely gives more so of that like balanced scale, like the masculine and the feminine in relation to things, and all of that. That they work in concert to have their roles to play, and you get more so that appreciation for both and their functionality and all of that. So at least from my understanding, like um, you could say Eastern Orthodox uh, and Catholicism, as opposed to say like your Baptist upbringing in particular, say like evangelical sort of like, or Protestant sort of like backgrounds, that there's a bit more of that cohesion.
Hmm.
And I also want to go ahead and mention you know Gnosticism, right? The more so like mystical sort of like alternates, Christianity as it's seen, you know, and all of that, like, and the hierarchy and the structure of it, for the general basic interpretation, because once again, even within that, there's many different interpretations and sects and different all these sorts of things. But most people, when people think of Gnosticism, they think of the idea that there's the pleroma, there's the heavenly light, there's the source, there's that divine light, so on and so forth. And like within that, like oh hey look, all this heavenly goodness, right? And whether you can say it's genderless or even if you want to say it's like a relative masculine sort of principle, what have you. Which like granted, I don't think that's necessarily the entire scope of it. That there's something above it and all that jazz, but you know, macrocosms to that relative microcosm, where that sort of like the pleroma is a macrocosm to our microcosm. But I digress. In that sort of sense, like there is a particular aspect to Sophia, which stands for wisdom, and in that sort of sense, like that is Sophia is femininely attributed, right? And from Sophia in the Gnostic sort of tales and lore, right? Due to they're going about and doing things without the masculine partner, like the informing part, like the heaven informing the earth, to use that terminology from language of creation, or the Peugeot brothers, that we go ahead and we have the demiurge created, Yaldabaoth, right? And from that, that's like a, you know, distorted masculine figure, right? The blind god, as you could say, that goes ahead and creates like, a distorted sort of like actual physical plane, matter, earth, which in of itself is a distorted feminine related to that, right? A lower, masculine and a distorted masculine that is going ahead and creating a lower distorted feminine in that particular perspective of things, right? So even in Gnosticism, there's that sort of like, um, that sort of like interchangeability. Like there's that sort of thing, right? Of the masculine and feminine playing out, and it's like lore and comprehension. And also being that we're talking about different Abrahamic faiths and religions and all that sort of thing, going back to Judaism, which was talked about a bit more so earlier on in the conversation, um, you know, um, so in talking about the Star of David and how that's like a combination of the two, the masculine and feminine and the symbolism in of itself, right? You know, um, I will say that from my understanding of Judaism, or at least the Kabbalistic sort of sphere of Judaism. The the Kabbalistic mystical sort of realm of it. That when it comes to the um, masculine and the feminine, right? So there's many different names of God. So let's just go and say Yahweh, right, for the general sort of thing. for naming that particular Abrahamic God, right? Of Hebrews and Judaism, and yeah, I'm not gonna lie, my brain's starting to you'll have a bit of brain farts at the timing at night, but I won't go for too much longer. We can go ahead and cap it out. But yes, so in that sort of sense, like we have you know Yahweh, right? And oh hey, look, it is attributed as like say more so masculine, right? But if something is total in complete totality, like complete, like and like everything, like the alpha and omega, and so on and so forth, and omnipresent, omnicapable, omniscient, all these different terms. There has to be a feminine aspect to it, right? There has to be that sort of thing within itself, or in some way, shape, or form connected to it, right?
Hmm.
A reflecting sort of principle, as we've been going ahead and discussing in this conversation thus far. And in that regard, in the Jewish scheme of things, that is the Shekinah, right? And within the general, once again, my general sort of comprehension of the Kabbalistic sphere of things, right? This comes from not only just like the lore of this in of itself, but kind of like the origin story, how it differs in that as a pair, as composed, as Okay, once again, here we go with the brain fog, the brain farts. Um, as opposed to say the Adam and Eve story, and like in Christianity and how it's usually there. Like, okay, so I'll go ahead and explain it more so as opposed to trying to like preface it. So in the Adam and Eve story, right? In the more so Kabbalistic spirit of things, we have before Eve comes about, we have Lilith, the demon Lilith, right? And in that sort of sense, like this first attempt at you know, making it feminine, right? Having a companion for Adam. The Lilith in of itself wanted to be more so dominant, wanted to go ahead and be more so the masculine role, right? Wasn't like, pretty much like I'm an independent woman and I don't necessarily need no man. That sort of approach to things, right? And because of that, right, like you not being in that, we could say so far in this conversation, the traditional, like, feminine sort of role and everything. And because of that, there was disruption because, like two two individuals who are trying to both play that dominance, that sort of like overt, that sort of masculine role, right? Um, and in that sort of sense, like, I'm not going to get too much into the Lilith, like, story. That's something we can go ahead and talk about by all means at some point later on. But in quick summary, did not necessarily turn out all too well for Lilith in terms of like that arrangement within the Garden of Eden. So then, in that sort of sense, that's when Eve came about, and was more so in line with that particular feminine archetype as we comprehend it and have talked about thus far. But yes, in that sort of sense, like, from my understanding, is since we were talking about lower feminine, lower masculine, in terms of elemental structures and all that sort of thing, right? Like Lilith plays that lower feminine expression of like a descent, the fall, you know, and all that sort of thing, right? That division between the heaven and the earth, and that sort of like, if there was a oneness before, everything became dualistic, right? And having a reflection, right? And in this sort of sense, the archangel Samael is kind of like reflected in that of being like the lower masculine and like the comparative partner for Lilith, right? And then like a more so of a higher sense, right? um, you have that sort of thing playing out in the lore and like all of that, and then you have like the Shekinah going ahead and breaking away from say Yahweh, and that being more so like the the higher expression of that, right? And the Shekinah kind of being like the essence of God that kind of permeates like the earth in that sort of like cosmological setting, not necessarily the whole universe or multiverse, in that old geocentric, earth-based sort of model where like everything revolves around the earth, or is a a dome encasing a flat Earth, and so on and so forth, right? Whereas, now we have the modern conception of a, like, heliocentrism and all of that. But in any case, um, you know, the Shekinah goes ahead and like falls, right? Falls from grace, falls from unity with the masculine. So as opposed to it being more so joint and unified, it is like, hey, look, we have the masculine, that's the higher, and then the Shekinah, which is the feminine, which is the lower, which is the actual, like, the spirit, the soul of Earth in of itself, um, and all of that. And like, going ahead and having quite a bit of a monologue on that, I will just go ahead and say before we go ahead and round this out for sure, because I know y'all two are dead tired.
Sweep.
Yeah. So, this is something that at a later date, we'll probably go ahead and discuss a bit more in depth. But generally speaking, sticking within the realm of Kabbalah and that sort of realm of magic and all of that, when it comes to the Kabbalistic tree of life and different Sephiroth and different sort of things, right? As well as not just the tree of life, but the tree of death as well. But you can say that on the more so encompassing tree of life and tree of death, the tree of life is more so masculine, the tree of death is more so feminine, right? Um, but generally speaking, um, the tree of life in of itself is comprised of many different spheres, and but there are two particular sides, two distinct sides to it, and these are the pillars of Boaz and Jachin, and these come from the Bible in of itself. At some point during the uh, I believe it's like within the first five books of the Bible, so on and so forth, right? And let me just go ahead and pull up these infographics that I went ahead and prepared to kind of just go ahead and help give my brain some food and all that, because generally speaking, truth be told, I knew we were probably going to be doing this late at night, so I'm going to need the assistance in this sort of regard. But we have over here, like, on a Cobblestone Tree of Life. On the one side, we have actually, did I get the right one for this particular thing? All right, I don't think I did for the particular Tree of Life model. I can go ahead and grab that on my phone real quick. But generally speaking, at least for the pillars of Boaz and Jachin, right? At least for the biblical roots, right? Boaz is in him is strength, and Jachin is he shall establish. So in this sort of sense, right? You know, both of them are mentioned, I believe. Okay, yes. So right here we have the pillars, and the dimensions, so on and so forth. Yes, I know, like, yes, like, quite a bit. Quite, yeah, we're going on for quite a while.
I'm sorry, Ellen.
Trust
That's
me,
all.
even though oh no, I got you. Even though I'm going ahead and I'm like going ahead and elaborating quite a bit, I definitely feel you on that as well, and all that. I'm just keeping the damn engine going for sure.
Dude,
Because once the engine
you're
stops,
the engine of the train right now. We're along for the ride.
yeah, as soon as yeah, trust me, as soon as I go ahead and shut my trap, trust me, I'm gonna be pretty much ready for sleep as well. Um, yes, it's just I'm going off adrenaline, if you can say that. But
Oh
yeah. So
wow.
here we go. I found a particular thing I wanted to find, and like right here we have on the particular tree of life, right? Boaz and Jachin, right? So the left pillar, right? As we were talking about previously, like, the left is more so of the feminine, and at least when it comes to, say, the righty tighty lefty loosey sort of thing, or like, right hand is usually dominant hand, left hand is usually more so of, like, the receptive, the submissive, and all that. So right's more so a masculine, left is more so feminine, usually speaking.
Mm.
And in this sort of sense, the pillar of severity of form, that is the feminine pillar on a tree of life. So within this, there are the spears, the sephiroth of, starting from the bottom, working our way upward. We have Hod, that is a Mercury. And then above that, we have Gebura, right? And that is severity in of itself. And from planetary archetype, I believe it actually happens to be Mars. Funny enough, it happens
Mm-hmm.
to land on the Martian sphere happens to land on the feminine one, like the left one. I always found that interesting. With the Venusian one happening to be more so the Netzach in particular, I was talking about to mention in a moment, that is on the masculine side. But yes, so the Martian one happens to be on the feminine pillar, and then we go up to the top, and then we have like the one for Saturn, which is Bina, right? And that goes the highest, at least in the model of the tree of life, the highest expression of the feminine in of itself. That form, the Earth, you could say, right? As opposed to like the heavenly, right? So it's the form. It's going ahead and taking the heavenly principles as was stated before, and it's going ahead and like codifying them. It's like going ahead and bringing it down to manifestation. It's putting it in the material realm somewhere to like how in the reproductive aspect, women go ahead and they take the form, they create the form of a baby, after good old sex and all that sort of thing, and all of that speaking. They're going ahead and bringing that forth into existence. And then on the right side, once again, the right being the masculine and all that sort of thing in this particular sort of like, comparative model and looking at the tree of life, we have the pillar of mercy. That is a force. And right here, so as mentioned before, the spear of Netzach, which is Venusian, which is the spear of victory, that in of itself, is the first sort of like masculine sort of form in of itself. So it's just interesting that from a modern conception of it, that the feminine is like the feminine goes ahead and is considered Venusian, whereas the masculine is considered like Martian and all that sort of thing. Um, and actually, what? That's definitely one thing I kind of like, want to have us. It brought me an idea of something that you can go ahead and mention, Debbie, before we wrap things up real quick. After I get through with the couple of pillars and like the whole right left dynamic. So then we have Kesed, right? Which is Jupiterian, planetarily speaking, and that is masculine in of itself on the pillar of mercy, and then the highest expression is Hokmah, which is wisdom and all that sort of thing. And truth be told, from my understanding, wisdom a lot of times is actually attributed as a feminine sort of thing. Within the Christian cosmology, there is a particular clip from Jonathan Pajoko's channel where he goes and talks about that in of itself. So I'll probably go ahead and add that to the links. Go ahead and check out for y'all. But yeah, I just want to go ahead and like touch upon the Kabbalist Tree of Life model, and probably not the most eloquently due to how tired we all are and the time of night and all sort of thing. But better that be said than not said at all. And yeah, and just generally speaking, um, being that we went ahead and have talked about the right and left, and all that sort of thing. For those who are familiar with the terminology, or if you're not necessarily aware, the idea of the right hand path and the left hand path of magic and all of that interrelates with this quite a bit. So the right hand path is seen more so selfless. So you're saying like you know, um, that in of itself is like selfless. It's kind of like the heavenly sort of principle, like being a servant in heaven, as opposed to say the left hand path and kind of like the aims and goals. But generally speaking, it's like selfish, more so oriented, and being like a king in hell and all of that. But that's where I'm going to leave in regards to that sort of thing. The one thing in particular that I can think of that kind of like um, we went ahead and did not necessarily address. Well, granted, like we covered more so the Western sort of attributions for the masculine and the feminine. Like that's not necessarily touching upon, say, the Eastern sorts of things like Hinduism or Buddhism or Shinto. But damn it, we went ahead and covered quite a bit within the Western sphere of things. Um, but yeah, uh, which I'm trying to think like when it comes to like the Star of David, like the that has 6-pointed star symbolism. I believe that in of itself, like one expression that within Hinduism in particular, is like the whole dynamic of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva being the masculine and Shakti as like the feminine, to create the Murugan, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then like the idea of Om as like the child in of itself, and Om in of itself like the divine like vowel, you could say divine like vibratory sound and all that is personified as Ganesha and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But generally speaking, um, there's a lot that if we want to go into the Eastern realm of things with Hinduism or Buddhism or Shinto or anything else, we could. But like I said, I think we covered generally quite a bit here.
Part
Um,
two
oh,
later.
at some point, yeah, at some point, potentially so. But the one thing I did want to go ahead and have you touch upon, Debbie, because you went ahead and spoke about it before, is like so in my combing over the cobblestick tree of life and like how the spear of Mars is on the feminine side
Mm-hmm.
of that model, whereas say Venus is on the masculine side. It reminded me of how when it comes to the colors of blue and pink, how nowadays we go ahead and establish it and have it as
Ah,
like
yes,
a
they were
blue's
flipped in the
masculine, pink is feminine. Yep.
1920s.
Go on, talk about it. Yep.
Okay. Yes. So the funny part is that originally it was considered blue was the feminine color, and it was powder blue, um, which of course that's going to be like that light baby blue, right? But that pink was the masculine color because that was the color that white um, white cloth had turned after you washed the blood out of it, which I believe this was stated like in a 1920s magazine, and I always found it quite hilarious. I'm kind of shocked that you remember that conversation.
Oh yes, yes.
But yes, it has flipped. I don't remember necessarily when it did, um, but I do believe that we have had some flipped roles in terms of not just the metaphysical, but the societal for quite a while. And it's the reason for a lot of our havoc, but that is for another topic of discussion.
A lot of food for thought to chomp on in regards to this. So I guess fucking closing thoughts in regards to the masculine and the feminine of something we already covered or whatever else before we go and wrap this up in a nice little bow and take our happy asses to sleep.
Everybody's a beautiful yin yang.
Everybody is a beautiful. Yes.
That's the
I
closing
agree with that.
argument.
No, I
Yes.
actually
So
have another quote from the Red Book that I love a lot. It says, "What about masculinity? Do you know how much femininity man lacks for completeness? Do you know how much masculinity woman lacks for completeness? You seek the feminine in women and the masculine in men, and thus there are always only men and women. But where are people? You, man,
Everywhere.
should not seek the feminine in women, but seek and recognize it in yourself as you possess it from the beginning."
oh
Oh,
yes,
I like
yes,
that.
I do too.
yes, and and just going ahead and thinking about that. this is the perfect way to go ahead and close this conversation. I forgot that we could go ahead and talk about like the symbolism of like say Baphomet and all that, and like the
Mm-hmm.
masculine and the feminine coming together. But you know what? I'm just gonna say, just in me mentioning that, the perfect way to go ahead and close this out um, is that yes, Baphomet as a symbol of like the mystical union of like masculine, feminine, and is a hermaphrodite. So yes,
That is the
in terms
ultimate
of like
form in terms of spirituality and has been sacred in many cultures the world over. But that is it. We are done.
yeah, yeah. So generally speaking, y'all, uh, from a metaphorical perspective, whether you go ahead and you're a dude in the flesh or you're a chick in the flesh or whatever you want to identify yourself as, you should look to become a hermaphrodite. You know, in the different aspects of yourself, physically, mentally, uh, emotionally, spiritually, all that. Become a hermaphrodite. There you go.
Ta da.
Hermaphrodites for the
Ta-da.
win.
Yes.
Yeah. So there you go. And any last
Peace,
thoughts,
love,
Light?
wisdom, everybody. Uh, no, my only thought was peace, love, and wisdom.
Love it.
Okay, you're.
Love it. All right. So we're closing this out. This has been a long ass conversation. Good God. Um,
Yep.
but this is Devi here on the Opener Sorcery. And of course, I've got Twisted
You're.
and Light.
Hello.
And we are closing this out. So we will catch you next time. Have a good one, guys.
Stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.
Peace.